Good morning and sorry for the delay. I'm very glad that our techno people are here and can figure all this out because it's way beyond my capabilities. You know, we went into social work because we didn't want to do math and we didn't want to do techie things. So thank goodness for them. I'm going to let Dr. Kaufmann introduce himself, and he will give us a break about midway through his presentation. And I have heard him before. I actually was on the International Certification Board with him for a very short time, and he is a very knowledgeable, very good presenter, and I think you will enjoy him this morning. As Cindy said, if you have any questions, get them back to her, and Mike will text them to him so he can address them. Sorry about the inconvenience. Again, it's not his fault, it's not our fault, it's Delta Airlines. And so, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Kaufmann.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I wish I was in the room with all of you. But like we said, I was on the plane and the plane just didn't take off for hours and they decided to cancel the flight. And instead, there was no option to reschedule because I'm presenting first thing in the morning with all of you. So I just had to go home, and luckily, I was able to talk with the technology people and mention, hey, I'm also a Twitch partner. I stream video games and talk mental health and psychology 3 times a week, and I am sure we can find a way to get me on the screen and have all of you be able to hear me. The one thing I know I'm going to be missing today is the ability to see your hands raised and hear your voices and be able to talk with you during the break. I really do enjoy those parts of coming to conferences and talking about psychology, mental health, and gambling issues. But we'll have to adjust and do the best we can. So, my name is Dr. Daniel Kaufmann, and I am a board member on the International Problem Gambling and Gaming Certification Organization. We just changed our name. It used to be called IGCCB. And honestly, I think that is the first time I've ever said the new name out loud with my own voice. I think I nailed it, but it feels very odd. I am I do a lot of things. I'm an associate professor at Grand Canyon University in their clinical mental health counseling program. I teach at the master's and the doctoral level. I'm the director of gaming services and program development at Kindbridge Behavioral Health. And what I do there is I create online trainings and I provide the BACC case consultations for our clinical staff. And we do counseling and coaching services via telehealth for almost 40 states in the United States right now. And coaching we can do in all the states, but of course, there's additional considerations when you're doing insurance billing and you need licensed providers and things. So we can do any state. We can do international services for coaching services. But if you need to dive deeper and do more of a counseling approach, our our counseling services are only in about 37 or 40 states. I'm the co-chair of the DSM-5-TR Research Task Force, looking at all published research and issues relating to video games and the potential for a video game disorder diagnosis in the future publications of the DSM. And I'm most recently and very proud to say I'm the author of a book called The Gamer's Journey. And for any of you that are aware of the phrase the hero's journey, which is a concept that we look at in literature and mythology of how a regular person goes through the path to become a hero and save the world. And that can be metaphorically applied even to the therapy process. In fact, early in my doctoral career, I was reading a lot of published peer-reviewed articles, either reflection, reflective practice, or data driven, looking at how clients move through their treatment goals. And these clinicians and researchers were talking about how the hero's journey is a parallel to what clients go through in their journey for growth in therapy. That idea just latched on to me about 10 years ago because I've been a fan of the hero's journey my whole life as a Star Wars fan since childhood. And so I started to really academically study that. And now it's become my thing. I am constantly talking about our stages of growth and how we can apply our counseling theories and interventions into the challenges of the growth process, and also to connect the video games that people can play. My beginning with gambling issues actually was with the Florida Council on Compulsive Gambling. I was their clinical director starting in 2013, and we ran the helpline and connected people to treatment. And so that's when I started working with gambling people in a daily on a daily basis and helping them find counselors in their area that they could get to and even provide the funds for them to do treatment from the tribes and state contracts in the state of Florida. And so I've been working in the gambling specific space for almost 13 years now. And so it's become all these process addictions that we call them in our field have become a path for me to reach people and talk and share ideas and hopefully help people see things in a new way. As far as the internet, my brand and what I go by, my alter ego, like Bruce Wayne has Batman, I'm Dr. Gameology on the internet, and I stream on Twitch and I make YouTube videos and talk about all these psychological metaphors that we see in video games and how people can apply them. And so it's been a wild journey. I do a lot of things, and the reason I do these things is because I teach online and I counsel online and I supervise online. And sometimes it feels like people are not building a deep connection with me. And I want those friendships and I want those bonds. And I wanted to create a way for people to continue to interact with me and engage with me. So, building an online community using that Dr. Gameology icon has been a really fun part of my journey the last 5 years. So I am here today to talk about a series of presentations. There's actually going to be two segments to this training today. Before the break, we're going to be doing at least the first topic, which is going to be typology of problem gambling. So it's important to make a distinction here that not all gambling is egregious. Not all gambling is harmful. Some people actually engage in what we call healthy gaming. In fact, whenever I have to do video shoots and things for companies that work in the gaming space, the gambling space, they always want me to use the word gaming. And in my head, gaming is, controller, PlayStation, Xbox, video games. It's not gambling, but for them, they want to be called gaming because to them, what they do is a game too. So we'll talk about what makes something a game, but in essence, healthy gaming is when there are no consequences or the severity of the consequences is similar to the price of admission. So if we want to look at how we spend money as a consequence, right? If I want to go see a movie at my local movie theater, I'm willing to spend $15 to see that movie, and that's the cost of admission. So if you look at a gambling opportunity, like what is the cost of admission that's reasonable for me to be able to enjoy this thing? And so if you are a healthy gamer in your gambling habits, then you are only paying a cost that is reasonable that results in zero extra consequences in your life. But gambling is structured in a way where you're inevitably going to want to chase here and there. You're inevitably going to want to get revenge and actually win because you feel like the loss that you just absorbed was unfair. And so then you might start to push those limits and spend more and more because the way the game is affecting you is connecting with your internal psychology of how you see yourself and what you need from your day in order to feel positive experience of enjoyment. And when you can't get that positive experience of enjoyment and you do play more and you bet more and you bet higher and you bet more often, that can lead to problem gambling very easily. And all the different pathways for how that works is what I'm going to be talking with you about in this first presentation today. Like I said, there are 3 presentations, and my goal is to get through all 3 of them by the time we reach noon. I believe noon is our stopping point. And actually, I can't hear anything right now from you. So hopefully, if I'm wrong, someone will send me a text message. So if you are involved in gambling and it's healthy for you, I have put a series of descriptors on the screen here for everyone to see very clearly what healthy gambling would look like if a person is doing it. It's a well-informed choice. You know, in general, what the odds are. You know, in general, how many times you're going to push to play. It's pleasurable with low personal and financial risk. Your family and friends know you're doing it. You don't have to keep a secret. They think it's fun. Your conversations about gambling are above board and out in the open, not deceptive, and it's not something that you have shame about. And you can even make jokes about it, like, LOL, I can't believe I lost that much. How stupid. And it's not something that's going to diminish your psychological quality of life or your mental health. It's not going to damage your relationships because everyone sees what's happening and can comment on it the same way they would comment on how you performed in a basketball or hockey game or other sport that you're involved in. Okay? It's something that can be happily integrated into your life, the social structures of your life. It's affordable, it's a sensible amount. The percentage that you're losing from the activity compared to your overall income and your overall resources is not damaging. And it actually helps you feel better. It could be a coping mechanism, it could be a stress reliever, it could be something that gets your mind engaged and you just want to see, can I win? Can I figure this out today? Especially if you're playing a game that has more of a skill focus. Okay. It's very hard for me as a video game player to look at a slot machine that way because you're just pushing a button, right? You're not really doing all that much strategically in a slot machine. But if you're doing sports betting, if you're playing poker, if you're involved in blackjack or other card-based games where you need some component of knowledge and some component of strategy, then there are things that you could argue here that if it's healthy, then it's just a mental strategic release that you're playing a game and you're hoping that it's going to go well for you and that you're trying to make better decisions in the future because of that strategic component. And again, no negative, ongoing deleterious life consequences. Okay, so there is a consequence. You play a game you paid for and you lose that money. Just like if I'm at a theme park, which there's so many of those around me. I live in Florida and Orlando is one of the best places for theme parks. You'll get to that section of the theme park where there might be a basketball hoop and they'll say, 1 shot, $8, 2 shots, 15, 3 shots, 20. And if you make that shot, you get a giant plush toy, right? That you get to lug around with you inconveniently the rest of the day. I think that's a punishment, by the way, but let's just say that it's a prize and a reward, right? If you miss those shots, you do not get the plush toy, right? So that game right there is actually a gamble. Okay. It doesn't happen at a casino and it doesn't usually drive people to go to treatment. I have never once in my life, out of the almost 1,000 of clients I've worked with in different capacities, I've never once had a person say, Dr. Kaufmann, I did not win the Bart Simpson trophy at Universal and, or plushie, sorry, not trophy. Dr. Kaufmann, I did not win the Bart Simpson plushie at Universal. And I knew I needed to go do treatment because of my basketball gambling problem. Never happened, not once. Knock on wood. Actually, now that I've said that, I have a lot of anxiety that's going to happen in the next 90 days. But it's never happened. And I am imagining that some of you are laughing and smiling because of my sarcasm there. So hopefully you are. Actually, you definitely are. All 100 of you in the room. Okay. So, how does gambling switch from being this casual, fun, healthy, uplifting coping mechanism to being unhealthy? Well, unfortunately for us, I don't think very many slot machines have actual stop signs on them because that's the opposite of the programming they want to give us. But if it did, it would certainly be a positive change because some people need that prompting in order to remember to stop. In fact, I don't know how driving is where all of you are coming from, or if anyone has traveled farther or from out of state. I'm assuming a lot of the attendees today are in the state of Kentucky. But where I am, the driving is haphazard and terrifying. And so I really do believe that, contrary to common sense, if there were not stop signs, people would not stop. And then we just have chaos and very dangerous chaos. And that's kind of what slot machine gambling and other types of gambling can do for people. Actually, any gambling that doesn't have a reasonable amount of responsible gaming measures to help people restrict, stop, slow down, are going to be much riskier or more considered high risk because it's hard once you get into a groove and into a role, into a psychological flow state. I love researching psychological flow. I don't remember if we're talking about that today, but that's one of my passions in research, and I'd love to talk with some of you more about that today or in the future. So what we are looking at here is a classic chart. It comes from Dr. Robert Custer. If any of you are familiar with him and his work, one of the trailblazers and original people to establish a lot of the psychological principles in our gambling specific treatment field. And this V chart, as we call it, is the process of stage change in problem gambling and through recovery. So on the left side, you see 3 stages leading to the 4th stage, the devastation stage. So the first stage, and this stage is actually why I think I never became a gambler. It's called the winning stage, okay? And one of the worst things that can happen to a person when they're gambling is they win early in a way that is meaningful to them because the flood of dopamine and other reward neurotransmitters in the brain that happen when an unexpected win that seems life changing but probably is just day or afternoon changing is going to fundamentally change the reward system of the brain and what you expect when you choose to play that specific game. So, when you are involved in your gambling activity early on and you don't have all these memories of loss and pain and stress and fear, the winning gets in there and it reprograms all those negative feelings to where they're less likely to happen. So, I was on a cruise one time in my early adult life with my wife. It was one of our early vacations together, and cruises have gambling opportunities, okay? And so we were going through one of the hotels at one of the landing spots for the cruise boat. And we decided to play $5 each on a slot machine, and we both lost all $5 instantly. And so I did not get a winning stage, and I realized, oh, that was kind of dumb. I could have had a snack or food or a drink or something. Like, man, I feel like I got robbed. So the winning stage never happened for me, and I never got to go down the rest of this slide here from the winning stage into the later stages because gambling wasn't fun. In my brain, I learned it's a waste of money. There's better things for me to do, and I don't want to spend any more time in my day doing that. But other people are not so lucky. In fact, I was the luckiest I could have been there. And a lot of people would think, well, if you're lucky, you probably would have won, Dr. Kaufmann. And I would say, after the treatment, for all the people I've worked with and placed in therapy and helped guide through helpline calls, I feel so lucky. Now, in retrospect, because I was not even a counselor back then. This is a long time ago. And I really do feel like when people win early, it is the worst thing that could happen to them. Because when you have all that expectation to get a big win, that you know how to plan for it, you know how to keep going for it, you're eventually going to gamble more. You're going to be drawn to it. And eventually those odds are going to catch up with you and you will not keep winning. So that brings us into the losing stage. And you can see on the slide, hopefully, you can see on the slide a lot of the different things about how the losing stage affects you to the point where you are now lying and you are being deceptive and you are ignoring your responsibility types of choices with your money. And you start also prioritizing the chance to gamble over your chance to use money in different ways. So when I go to conferences, one of the things I do, normally I do for whatever reason, the universe has conspired for me to be a morning presenter rather than an afternoon presenter, which is fine because I'm a morning person. I love doing my best work before noon. And one thing I will ask is how many of you have gotten Starbucks today? Okay. And then usually a lot of hands raise. I think clinical types like our coffee and caffeine and things like that. So when I ask that, it is a natural segue into now imagine that you can't do that. You can't do a toll road to get to work. I don't know how Kentucky is with toll roads, but if you can't afford toll roads in Florida, everything is going to take you an extra 30% to get where you're going of time. So it's important to have disposable income in small quantities every single morning in Florida, whether it's to get your coffee or to use a toll road. When you are a problem gambler, you will change the trajectory of your day to avoid all those little transactions because every little bit has to go into your chance to win big. So if you're in the losing stage, that's going to be very frantic proposition because your money is now switching from a resource for you to navigate your day-to-day life, to plan your month, plan your finances, get your mortgage and your car paid on time. And now the money is just really monopoly money that can only be spent on a gambling game. Okay, it's not real anymore. But the problem is all the things in your life that are expecting you to send them the real money are going to eventually start asking more aggressively. And that leads to desperation because now you can't cover the things in your life at all. And then you might start pawning things that are important, your TVs, your computers, jewelry, things that anything that can get you 50 to 100 to a couple $100. And you start looking at everything that you can get rid of as a way to justify the next play. And you start to really believe that winning big is the only way to get out of this hole. And that brings me to another very important point here. For a problem gambler that's on this downward slide of the V chart, it is one of the only addictions where you believe that participating in the addiction is the path to being healed or cured from the addiction. So if you go into substance use, there are no drinkers that I've ever talked to or alcoholics or people diagnosed with alcohol use disorder that believe that the next drink that they have is going to cause them to never need another drink the rest of their life. But in gambling, because of how money is the fuel in a very different way than just purchasing a product, people actually believe this. When you get in there and you start asking a lot of in-depth questions about how they see their money and what they believe about their gambling and what's your 5-year plan with this, they really believe that, well, if I ever were to win 100 grand, and something outside of my job, like I just get 100K and I still have my salary, I still have my flow of income, then maybe I wouldn't have to gamble anymore. Certainly if it was 500K, right? Certainly if I ever got to a million, right? And we're going to talk about how people who gamble keep track of that dollar amount in their head because that's also part of the disorder. But In short, they believe that gambling is the path to not needing to gamble anymore. And that is a bad deal for them. And so, if you do not change something during the losing stage or the desperation stage, you will inevitably end up in that blue box at the bottom where hopelessness, suicidal ideation, arrests, other addictions start building up, breakdowns, relationship breakdowns, and also withdrawal symptoms. That every time you're not gambling is you laying yourself down because you should be trying to win. So then the recovery phases are when a person decides to make a change in their life. And often we are going to be able to witness some of these things happen. The critical stage could be the decision to start going to GA or get a counselor and start looking for ways to not gamble during your day. Rebuilding is a more in depth, dedicated result of that work. And then the growth stage is more like a maintained period of abstinence or maintained period of zero consequences related to gambling. Usually that means the person is not gambling anymore, because once you start gambling in this reckless way in the blue downward stages, it is very unlikely that you're going to be able to keep gambling in a way that's healthy. So, you know, if once you go down the dark path, forever will it dominate your destiny. Like Yoda said in Star Wars, right? For anyone who's still familiar with those movies. Actually, I know I'm older than I was when I started teaching because I am now teaching grad students that don't understand Star Wars references. So I'm imagining everyone in the room is frowning and is joining in my disappointment at that. So let's talk about basic knowledge relating to gambling. So in order to really talk about what makes something behavioral considered as an addiction, okay, and I know that my webcam is covering up a little bit of this, and I apologize. This wasn't my original goal for our setup today, but I will read what is being covered. Historically, addiction has been understood in various ways: a sin, a disease, a bad habit, and each of these is a reflection of a variety of social, cultural, and scientific conceptions. So this is from a textbook from 2012, and I think that that really sums up how we can consider something to be an addiction that is not that traditional model of being a substance that we take into our body, that we ingest, inhale, inject. Um, and so for me, if you notice from my about me and my description of myself and the work I do, everything I work with in depth is essentially a process addiction. And so early in my career, especially that era before the DSM-5 came out, when it became the purple book, we're talking about the gray book, the DSM-4 revised, is where my career started. And I remember speaking about video games and gambling at a traditional addiction conference. It was the Florida Addiction Conference, 2012 or something. And I remember the looks of the people in the audience. It really felt to me like I was an outsider, like I wasn't supposed to be on the program today. Like I should feel lucky that any of them came to my room for my breakout session, because I'm talking about a fake addiction. And some of the questions I got at the end of my presentation were bold and rude enough to actually phrase like what I was talking about. And remember, I'm working with problem gamblers every day. I know this is a real addiction, and our field has come a long way in that respect, but it is built into the history of our field that addiction is substance. And so I still have that chip on my shoulder still. And I know we don't have to really get stuck on that today because we're here to talk about gambling. But when you are treating gambling with some of that old school treatment program mentality, it can be frustrating because insurances have that old school mentality. And a lot of the foundational structures in our field still hold on to the fragments of thinking that way about what addiction is. So I think it's important for us to remember that, even if our field is getting better slowly. Also, Just because something is getting better doesn't mean it cannot slide backwards into old habits. So we are in the midst of rapid change that affects our funding, that affects our clients, and who could even afford to be our clients. And I think it's important for us to understand the historical context of an issue like gambling so that we can advocate for people better. So when we say something is a process addiction, by the way, everybody looking at these little colorful shapes, raise your hand if you plan on doing 2 or more of these sometime today. By the way, buying some random thing you forgot to bring to your hotel room on Amazon, that's shopping. Just because you're not in a store doing it in person, it's still shopping. Using your debit card to buy lunch, if you're doing that, that's something, right? You can get a chemical neurotransmitter based reward from any of these so many times during your day. And that does not mean you're addicted to them, of course. But so many of these things have become easier to access, more convenient. Do them just from your phone, it's always in your pocket. And some of these things are not even bad, right? Like if you have these in your day, you think you're having a thriving, healthy, prosperous life in some respects. But you can form negative, hurtful attachments to anything if you overuse it to the point where it affects your health. And health, I'm saying holistically here. I'm not saying just things that doctors look at when you go for your annual checkup. I am talking about mental health. I'm talking about existential views of yourself and how you connect with your life and your purpose, right? Really deep stuff that even our clients are not mentally prepared to think about sometimes. So, process addictions are, it's an umbrella term for anything that is not chemically based, but could become an addiction that gets into your thought process as a over involved motivator that will cause you to make bad choices during your day in order to get access to the thing. All right, 1 second. So let's define gambling. We're going to go with the NCPG on this one. This is a, oh, I'm so sorry. I have a fragment of a slide from my training in Arizona from years ago. I'm so sorry for that. But anytime you bet money or risk something of value on an event with an uncertain outcome, you're gambling. And gambling has not always been this over negative thing. In fact, going back thousands of years into ancient civilizations and even our ancient religious texts, gambling actually is portrayed quite positively because for less technologically advanced societies that have a decided need to see the will of God reflected in their existence or to see, or the gods. It doesn't have to be the one all powerful one, or just how higher power or just how the universe wants the world to work, karma, whatever. We see gambling as an opportunity to understand and interpret fate. Okay. And so we will roll dice carved out of bone in order to see, hey, God, should I do this thing? We see it time and time again in especially the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament. So there is an established mindset that gambling can be used in order to figure out what is supposed to happen. I don't see it that way at this point in my life, but growing up as a child, I remember many times where a story would be told, and my dad, who I'm going to just be honest because I think it explains a little bit of how my brain works. Um, my dad is and has always been a pastor. And so we would get these stories like with Jonah and getting cast off the boat, swallowed by the whale, and be like, yeah, they cast lots. That's a form of gambling. And remember, we don't gamble. And so I think that it's important always to remember that not everyone has that fear of gambling built into their life starting when they're 3 years old. So some people are going to get riskier quicker because it's not this thing. Also, when you build fear into someone's life early in a developmental stage like that, sometimes it makes it hmm, what's the right word? Sometimes it makes it more thrilling or sexier to make that series of bets and become a gambler. It's part of your rebellion phase. So that doesn't always work as a parenting technique to build shame around an unwanted activity. So, and we know that as counselors, because if we're working with teens or young adults or even old adults, middle-aged adults, I think we're all carrying some amount of shame about something that probably could be move past. And gambling fits into that category of potential issues where your early developmental stages created a picture in your mind of what gambling is, and that in some way relates to how you decided to start gambling. So let's talk about some specific types of gamblers, people who gamble, I should say. So the first type I want to talk about would fall into the healthy gaming category. We can call those recreational gamblers. And you see all the different boxes pointing in at the central circle here. This is what gambling looks like when it's fun and when it's not hurting you. No negative consequences, realistic expectations. Understanding how odds work is really important. And I have a story that I will never forget. It was when I first started my private practice. It was one of my first five gambling clients that got referred to me by my state council. So it was a woman in her late 70s, late life onset gambler. She only started gambling once her husband passed away as a way to connect with her social circle, go out on outings, and have something to do outside of the house. And she said something to me, and this relates to the realistic expectations box. She said something to me during her session that did not make statistical sense to me. And I know for a fact at the time I was in my doc program and I was taking advanced quantitative analysis as one of my classes for the semester. And I heard what she said about how she knew she was going to win and she didn't, and that wasn't fair. So I questioned, well, how did you know you were going to win? And so she answered, and I was like, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to destroy this person's perspective of how odds work if we're ever going to make progress on this idea today that she's talking about. So I took out a coin, and coins have two sides. They have heads and they have tails. And I had a handful of quarters in case I had a client pay for their session in cash. So I got the quarter out and I said, I'm going to flip this coin. I want you to call it. Okay, it doesn't matter if you get it right, but heads or tails, just call it in the air. She said, okay, I can do that. So flip, and then I caught it. I put it on top of my hand, and then she had said heads, and it was tails, which actually worked really well for this activity, but it would not have mattered if she got it right. Okay, because the second flip is what I was actually interested in. So since it was tails the first time and she said heads, I said, I'm going to flip it again. Can you please tell me, just call it in the air again? She said, well, I don't have to. It's going to be heads this time. So I didn't flip it. I said, why? She said, well, because it's 50-50 and we just had tails. So I flipped it. And then again, I was really lucky in this scenario because everything worked exactly the way I wanted it to. And that is not how this could have happened. But I flipped it and it was tails again. So we talked about that. And she was like, I just don't understand. It's not 50-50. I was like, it's not 50-50 overall. It's 50-50 every time you flip it. And she's like, what do you mean? And I was like, well, it's all about probability. So if we flip the coin 10 times, we might get five heads and five tails, or we might actually get 7 heads and 3 tails. Every sequence in that 10 flips has the same odds of happening. It's just our perception of the flips that changes. She's like, what does that mean? Okay. So I could tell this story for about an hour longer because there's so many implications of this conversation, but I hope all of you can see what I'm up against and what all of you will be up against in your sessions working with a person who's gambling and hurting themselves. They actually don't understand how to play smart because fundamentally their understanding of what their odds are is wrong. So helping them understand the stats and probability is not always a path to them making better choices. But if you believe that you can roll a dice 6 times and you will get one time, two, one time, three, four, five, and six, one time, I think all of us have probably played Monopoly or other board games to realize that that is not how it works at all. So imagine that every single time you do this, you're spending $10, right? You're going to run out of money unless you are blessed in ways that a lot of us mental health types are not. So, um, yeah, realistic expectations is such a big one. And some of that is actually education and intellectual understanding of probability and statistics. So, it's a losing battle before the battle even starts for some people, and they can't become recreational gamblers as a result. So, if you're not nestled happily in that little healthy gaming niche, then you are inevitably going to be experiencing a progression through some of these stages. So, in my opinion, we all gamble on something, right? In fact, I'm really glad my plane didn't take off yesterday because that could have been really scary if it did. So, you know, in that way, I feel like I was not given the opportunity to gamble on my plane flight, right? No gambling. The best way to avoid the consequences of something going very bad in a life activity is to not gamble with it. However, when we make choices about things in our career path, our relationship path, what house are we going to buy? What car are we going to buy? Where are we going to live? Even what street am I going to cross on my walking path today? These are all at some level a bit risky. You are trusting other things in your environment to allow you to be safe. So if you look at kind of a 12-step recovery perspective, anything can be a gamble, right? So it's not really possible to be a non-gambler in every single thing in your life. But what I would actually like to challenge and reframe that is it's not possible to never take a risk, right? That we do take risks every day. But the gambling kinds of risks are so, the odds are so stacked against us that the best recipe for success is to not engage in gambling activities. You can't lose them if you don't play them, and then you can retain access of all your resources. But if you do want to gamble, the healthiest category that you could fall into is casual and social gambling. And these are the low risk, infrequent, just playing for fun when the opportunity arises kinds of people. Okay. And you might go with friends and people who enjoy it with you, and the consequences are low, just the price of admission. If you start wanting to play a little more and you go more often, sometimes you're alone, that's going to be the serious social gambling. People might be with you, people might not be with you. You're taking it more seriously. You're planning it. It's in your routine. It's monthly. It's bi-weekly. It's twice a week. You're starting to treat it like it's a hobby instead of some random thing you can do for fun. If you keep doing that, the odds are going to catch up with you. You're going to realize some of these games you're only meant to win less than 1% of the time that you play. Also, when I say win, I mean a meaningful win. So, one of the things that happens when we see odds posted on different machines, like a slot machine, is Anytime you are given something by the gaming industry, they classify that as a win. But I would say if you're playing a game where one button press costs $1, I know these are low numbers, but just bear with me. Just hypothetically, if every button press is $1 and they give you back 50 cents, that's not a meaningful win to me as the person who's just spent $10 for 10 button presses. Okay. Your 50 cents back is not something that's going to make me go, yes, that was important for my day. In fact, that less than meaningful win that turns your dollar into $1.50, um, it's just meant to make you want to play more, right? It's a lame win. Okay. So lame wins lead to problem gambling because it causes you to chase and it creates a juxtaposition between losses and wins that is actually unhealthy for you and favors the house. Okay, so that going to that phrase, the house always wins. And then we have compulsive, pathological, disordered gambling here at the end. And that category for me is different than problem gambling. Problem gambling is not a diagnosis. Gambling disorder is the diagnosis. Okay. Problem gambling means this is stressing me out and it's not good for me and I can tell, but we're not measuring it. When we start saying gambling disorder, that last category, what that means is 4 out of 9 criteria based on how the DSM-5 or the ICD-11 define gambling disorder. Okay. That is a diagnosable condition. It is a health condition. It is something that requires a treatment plan and goals and objectives in order to start turning your life around. It is something that going to support groups or seeing a counselor or talking about it with your coach or getting a social worker to help you organize your resources and make smarter decisions. It is something that you need an intervention to overcome. And it is measured. Okay. So here are a list of qualities for different types of gambling as well. So we already have talked a little bit about the social gambler, the serious social gambler, but there's 2 new categories on here I want to call out because if you talk to a person who sees themselves as these 2 things, they will tell you that they see themselves in a certain way. Okay. For the professional gambler, these are people that look at gambling as a primary source of income or a primary contributor to their overall income. So gambling is their business. I apologize for the gendered language there. That should be their business. So gambling is their business. It's controlled, it's calculated, they're methodical, but there's something that's not listed here that I think is very important to understand. Sponsorships. Okay. If you are sponsored to play by a corporation, right, then that makes gambling your job. And that allows you to make your gambling decisions in a way that you're not risking your money or it's not 100% your money. Maybe there's incentives to win a certain way from your organization, but the chips that you're pushing out on the table are not actually yours, right? You are representing the entity that enables you to be a professional gambler. I've never had a person of this kind come into treatment because their losses are absorbed by levels of security for their personal life that it's their job, similar to a professional athlete playing a game. If you're a American football player and you win the Super Bowl, I'm sure that's a really gratifying feeling. But for all the other teams in the National Football League that did not win the Super Bowl, but still made hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions from their contract, they get to go home after those losses still feeling like my life's good. It would be nice to win, but my life is okay. All right. And that's what a professional gambler, in theory, would be able to do. But where this affects us in the way we do treatment is actually in this way. I've had many people in their first session tell me, Hi, Dr. Kaufmann. I like to do treatment and I'm a professional gambler. So then I dig in, I find a little bit about that professional structure that they're talking about. And eventually I will challenge that and say, well, I'm not sure that you're a professional gambler. And they'll say, why? Sometimes with varying levels of being offended, but they will say why. And I'll say, well, you don't have the financial structure in your life to protect you from your losses and treat this like it is your profession. You're not sponsored by anybody. Your losses are actually your money. You lose a lot. Okay. And most importantly, you just came to treatment for what sounds like gambling disorder. So, at the at the time, whether I'm doing counseling in a treatment program or directing a treatment program, or even when I was the president of the IGCCB, sometimes this conversation would come up, and I would just say to people when they give me no other choice, this is like break the glass, push the red button, and I just need them to start hearing me seriously for a second. And I'll say, look, professional gamblers do not end up talking to me. End of story, right? Like, I will do sessions with you, but if you really want these sessions to matter, you need to consider letting this label go, okay? Because it's causing you to make bad decisions. If you are a professional at something, your profession needs to be profitable. I believe if you are not profitable in your company when you're doing your taxes for a certain number of years in a row, your company can get dissolved, right? Because it's a hobby and not a business. And I think that that's important to translate into the idea of what it takes to become a professional gambler. The other category on here that we haven't talked about yet is the antisocial gambler. And these are people that are committing illegal acts in order to get the funding for their gambling. Most often, it would be stealing or laundering money, or, you know, different kinds of professions and jobs have done this with me in the past. Uh, People who take large amounts of money for housing projects or other kinds of projects and have that money sitting to use on supplies, materials, and labor. And they look at that and they have gambling in their mind. And they decide, well, if I go gamble and I can win some of that money, because that's so much money to use, I could gamble so much with it. I'm sure I can get at least that amount of money back at the end and then just put it back and no one will know. And that's the plan. But the plan does not go that way because you lose so much in these gambling games. Even 50-50 kinds of odds on a game will often result in you losing more than winning because every single play might be 50-50. That does not ensure that you will win as much as you lose. So, you know, these kinds of criminal activities, eventually you get caught, eventually people want retribution, you end up in court, you get sentenced to therapy, you get sentenced even to prison. But when we meet people that have that antisocial tendency in their gambling, they often have not hit those consequences yet. So there's also a lot of fear or worry about what will happen when I get caught, but they're not ready quite to stop gambling. So this is a group that you will need to understand and be able to give good recommendations to for them to change things quick, because they have to start making reparations. They have to start doing treatment and health related activities that will address their gambling and make a huge change to the pattern in their life. So I'm going to share an older concept with you, but I think, again, we need to understand the history of the field. And I think that this concept is still pretty applicable because the mechanism of why we gamble and why we choose what game we play is something that's very important to me in my research life and even the video game side of my life, too. Not all games are created equal, and not all people want to play all the games the same way. And just like I could list 5 different video games, and for those of you that don't play video games, it might just be, well, how much is the person playing and are they addicted to it? But being addicted to Fortnite is not the same as being addicted to Stardew Valley or Animal Crossing. Being addicted to Street Fighter is not the same as being addicted to World of Warcraft. Okay. And those are all video games, by the way. And so we take that psychological principle and we apply it to gambling games. Poker and blackjack are going to draw a certain type of mindset person in a way that a slot machine will draw a different kind of mindseted person into wanting to play. Sports betting using apps like DraftKings, Prize Picks, FanDuels, those are going to draw people in a much different way than wanting to go to a casino is going to draw people in. The lottery is going to draw people in, and all the different kinds of number picking games versus scratcher games are going to appeal to people differently. Also, the social setting of going on day cruises where you get into international waters and all types of games are legal. Because a lot of times there's different classifications of games, and some of them are not legal on land, or some of them are not legal on state property versus tribal grounds. And so all these different games are found and played in different ways. And mentally, people will choose a game that activates the chemical reward in their mind in the most powerful way. And that brings us to the concept of an action gambler versus an escape gambler. If I'm an action gambler, that means I want to defeat somebody. I want to take their stuff. I want to be smarter and more talented and more strategic than them. And I want to feel like I beat you. Okay. Escape gambling is much more off on your own, and it's you versus the game. Okay. So think about the difference between playing tennis and playing golf. Okay. And I know in golf, we've constructed competitions where people can play and keep their score. You do beat other people. But when you're in the moment trying to play golf well, it is you and the course. Okay. Your goal is to do the course better than other people, but it's you and the course. In tennis, you can make mistakes and your opponent can make mistakes, but overall, the goal is for you to defeat your opponent. Okay. And I think that's really important for us to be able to translate into how we see a game that our client is explaining to us. This game means something to them. And learning how to live healthy ways and still get that feeling in our life in a healthier way. Okay. Healthier, not healthy, but healthier is a big part of treatment. Okay. You are not going to be very successful taking a hyper competitive card gambling player who likes the action and telling them to live the lifestyle of a peaceful monk. Okay. Like you are not competing with people anymore. You are competition is bad for you. Under no circumstance will you play a game against other people. It could be good to detox from that competition for a period of time, plan that out, and execute the plan. But if we're looking at how will this person thrive for years down the line, eventually they're going to have to address their relationship with competing against other people. It might not be, it might also be manifesting in their work life and their relationships and their friendships and all kinds of things where it doesn't look like a game, but they're still competing. Same thing with escape gambling, right? How do you self-soothe? How do you engage in self-care? How do you escape? How do you feel like you are making a difference on the things that are bothering you at the deepest levels of yourself that you are conscious of? Okay, if you do not fix that, then the person will continue to need to escape. Okay, one of the things I talk about in my gaming videos that I put on YouTube, or if you've seen some of my other trainings online, I will share this idea now because I don't think I have a slide for it today. But coping and escape are not the same thing. I know sometimes us clinical types will use the words very similarly, but I think it's really important to not shame the need to escape. Okay. And I'm going to use metaphorical connections here. If you are standing in a fire, we should not be encouraging the person standing in a fire to cope. We should be encouraging them to escape. Coping is this is a part of my life, and I need to minimize how much it bothers me and find small ways to protect myself so that I can endure the situation over time. Escape means nope, I can't do this. I will die. Okay. And you get out of there. Okay. And even though you see a person playing an escape gambling game and they don't look like they're standing in a fire, this person in the little bubble on my slide does not look like they're sitting in a fire. But you can't see what they're escaping from. You can't see why they need to numb their brain and press the button or pull the lever for lengthy periods of time. You don't see what they're hoping to use that money for. You're not seeing what it is that's hurting them. You're just seeing the escape activity. Okay. It could be a coping activity too. I'm just saying these words are not one for one, right? A coping mechanism can be an escape. An escape activity can be a form of coping, but an escape activity can be even a distraction from the opportunity to cope. And a coping activity can actually be a sign that they're trying to do the right thing rather than escape. Okay. And I hope over time, the more people I get to train, that the field starts to see the nuance in those words and use them mindfully. Because if we can fix the language around these kinds of words, we can unlock additional strategies for our clients to use during their week to get through tough times and eventually thrive. So now that we know the types of gamblers in a basic sense and we understand how some of the games work, I want to talk about how the warning signs creep in. Okay. First off, you're not able to cover your losses. You have to start borrowing. And also, it's really important to note that a problem gambler is not going to be they're not going to be asking for money from other people for gambling, right? You ask for money to cover the thing that you can't pay for yourself because you were gambling, right? The sob story works a lot better that way. Okay. Hey, I gambled too much. Can you give me $150 so I can gamble more? That's a really bad pitch. Even if your mom and dad love you, they probably should not give you money if that's your pitch. Hey, money's been tight this month. I wasn't able to fully cover my light bill. There's about $150 left on the bill. I really don't want my lights to be turned off. Don't you care about your grandkids? Please help. Oh, sure, I'll wire the money today, or I'll Zelle it to you today, right? Now you got $150. So what's your brain going to do in about 13 minutes? Wow, that was really nice of my parents. I can gamble now and get even more money so that I can pay my light bill and have money for groceries. This is industrious. This is so smart. Wow, this strategy is certain to work. It doesn't work. Okay. And then you have to lie about how you lost the money that they gave you in order to cover the light bill. And then you're like, well, where did you go during the afternoon? Oh, I just went out to do errands. Those errands were the casino. Those errands were sitting in your car scratching off your scratchers and hoping to get more money from your closest gas station or favorite gas station. So you're distracted all the time. You have to start lying and hiding. And because you have all of this guilt and shame and angst inside of you about how dissonant or incongruent you are living your life and what you're telling the people that you love, now you're going to get more irritable. Your lies are going to be harder to cover up. And, you know, your life is slipping into chaos. The last triangle on the side is the way you tell the story of your gambling is not objective. Okay. I think all of us have a desire on some level to have to see ourselves favorably. So when we're given the chance to tell our war stories for life, I think that we do emphasize successes. I think we do minimize our role in our failures and shortcomings. But in gambling, this is amplified to unreasonable levels that the losses are because it's unfair, the odds are stacked against me, anyone would have done that. And then the wins are, you add a couple zeros to the story and make everyone impressed with you. Okay, so wins are all about me, losses are about how unfair gambling is. And when you do that, you prevent yourself from being able to hear your own story clearly. And that changes how likely it is that you'll make wise and mindful decisions in the future. So, again, the comparison healthy gaming versus unhealthy gaming, healthy gambling versus problem gambling. It's always going to come out that the calculated, low stress way that a healthy gamer is going to make their bets is going to be in contrast to the chaotic, high risk, frequent consequence lifestyle of a person who has an unhealthy attachment with their gambling activity. So before I start this next section, I do want to just open up for the idea that if you have questions, write them down, hand them to Mike, and Mike can text me while I'm doing the presentation, and I can either answer questions at a Q&A point, or I can answer them on the slide where I get the question if I can naturally segue into it. I want this to be as interactive as possible given our circumstances, and I want you to get all the information you need from me today to the best of my ability. So let's talk about our forms of gambling. What I have put here are all the different types of gambling that I could think of probably in 2 minutes or less. Okay. Some of these are not the kinds of things that you would traditionally think of. And gambling is always transforming. There are so many things on this list that were not in this list when my career helping problem gamblers began. And the reason for that is those activities weren't as popular, they weren't as well understood as a gambling activity. So, and also legality, right? Not every game in every game might have existed in some form or another, but they weren't legal, right? And a lot of gambling is more legal now than it was even 5 or 7 years ago. So it's important for us to understand what our community environment for gambling is. For example, one thing that I do not truly understand what it's like because I've never lived where we're doing this presentation today. I've never lived in Kentucky. or spent significant amounts of time in Kentucky. But one thing almost everyone who follows sports, at least at a casual and up level, understands about Kentucky is you have horse racing. All right. The Kentucky Derby. So big um, that even horse races that occur in other places are not going to have the same draw for people culturally to participate. And how do you participate if you're not a jockey and you're not raising the horses? You place bets. Okay. And I think that that's really important to understand is sometimes the choice to gamble is about belonging in your community, like a church that hosts bingo as a way to supplement offering um, in in a way, in a very roundabout way, but it happens. If you're living in a elderly community and they have regular field trips to casinos, and you choose to abstain, now you're the weirdo that doesn't want to go be social, right? So we can look at gambling as something that's risky and concerning, but at the same time understand the implications of why people choose to participate is not always just I want to have a gambling problem. It's not I want to be a gambler. Sometimes it's that, well, this activity is there and it's rude not to participate. So our desire to belong is on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It is an essential element of living life. Okay. And so sometimes that's how we stumble into these activities. Our choice to continue and do it in unhealthy ways is a different thing entirely. But I think it's important for us to consider why people choose to play in a holistic way. Um, okay. So, also in the United States, we have different levels of regulation. Um, this typo, I should probably just redo this graphic myself. This is not my graphic, so analyze casino. Shame on you. Um, but it does show what we need to know. In the United States and North America, different levels of regulation for gambling activity begin for people under age of 18 to restrict them at age of 18 to be able to participate and at age of 21 to be able to fully participate in all of it, regardless of what the game is. So it's important for us to think about that and also to understand how we will have conversations about legality in gambling with our clients in a way that fits the situation. The age of the first bet for a lot of my clients is actually more like 12 or 13. But those bets are not happening in a casino or a place where there's rules in place to prevent underage gambling. Those are happening at family poker nights. Those are happening on basketball courts or baseball fields. Those are happening in places where you're getting a positive societal message about what gambling is and that it can be fun. It makes the games more exciting. And so you are learning that message depending on what your home life and upbringing is at earlier ages than the decision of, am I going to participate in legal forms of gambling? So it's important for us to understand that. Also, how many of us have gone to a conference, other kind of public event, and there are raffles? I've been to so many mental health conferences where they have the booths for the exhibitors, and you go by and you get a stamp. You get the stamps at all the booths, which encourages you to actually talk to everybody. And then there's a drawing for an iPad or something like that. And that's pretty commonplace in our field. But you know what? I get to do events for different industries now because of all of the gaming stuff that I do. And it's really interesting which types of communities are apprehensive of gambling versus which ones do not view raffles and punch cards as a form of gambling at all, that it's just part of the environment. So mental health conferences, I think historically have loved these raffles, right? But I was at a fan convention for gaming just a few months ago to promote my book. And the booth that I was at, where my publisher was selling my book, sells all kinds of things for Dungeons and Dragons. They sell dice and dice towers and card games, and they also sell mental health workbooks and geek therapy materials and books. And the person organizing the event came up and said, we heard that you're giving out tickets for every sale and you're doing a drawing at 5. We need to ask you not to do the drawing at 5." And so, owner of the company is like, this is just to encourage them to come back and re-engage with the booth, and so they'll remember us hopefully after the event is over, because we have a lot to offer them and their companies and communities. And they're like, yeah, but we need to make sure you don't do the drawing at 5 o'clock. So mental health conferences frequently use raffles and punch cards and stamps to give us a chance to have that little bit of fun and enhance engagement. But fan communities are like, you can't promote gambling here. So I just thought that was really interesting, that you would think that um, people with our level of training, advanced degrees, and state licensures would understand that and just not do it. But nope, turns out gambling is embedded into society and is viewed pretty favorably overall. And so a lot of times prevention is the goal, and providing resources for people where prevention didn't work. So it's a reasonable cost of doing business is that people will gamble. Now, states have lotteries. A lot of states have lotteries. So another way to we need to supplement the state revenue and ongoing flow of income. And so in order to do that, we will create a lottery. We know people are going to gamble with it, but price of our state existing and having an economy, right? So I think that when we look at these different games, it's important for us to understand just like what ages is it legal to gamble, which games are legal to gamble with, but also what is the logical rationale and the hoops we jump through in order to say, this is okay, I'm willing to live with that. Like, yes, X percentage of our population is going to struggle with this, but just think about how much we can help education. Um, I'm sorry. I'm cynical. I'm very skeptical of how much gambling funding actually does help education. But that's been the historical tagline, right? Play, have fun, gamble, and help our education system. So, all right. So I am providing this slide here. The data is old now, but I collected this data and it kind of helped open my eyes about the potential for gender disparity in different games. So I have continued to share this because I think it's important for us to see that gender, if we're using a binary perspective, so male and female, male presenting and female presenting, that kind of thing. Um, the different genders think about and are affected by different kinds of games differently. So this is not always true. In fact, in treatment, I've had so many more female card players than that. I mean, they've told me they're professional gamblers. Than I've had male card players that have told me they're professional gamblers. So there's a little bit of data there that's not reflected in the chart. And so then you would argue, like, what's the likelihood that a male card player is going to decide to give up and go do treatment and pursue recovery goals versus a female, right? So maybe it's more about who goes to treatment that I'm seeing in my office, but the data overall of who calls the helpline says 8% of women are going to choose cards as their primary game that they prefer. 42% of men are going to choose. Okay. So there is a disparity there. 74% of women who call a helpline and say what their primary gambling game is are going to say slot machines. 30% of men are going to say slot machines. So we all prefer different games differently, and gender has an effect there. Okay. So when we're looking at gambling disorder and other kinds of gambling problems, okay, how many minutes have you gone without being able to hear me? Can you hear me now? I am just doing some test audio while I wait to get a text message back. Okay, that pop-up a few minutes ago, Zoom just decided out of nowhere to switch to a different audio device. It popped up on my screen and said that, but OBS still had my microphone responding, so I thought you could hear me. Do I need to go back a slide or two? I'm just waiting to receive a text response. I apologize, everyone. We're breaking new ground in terms of what we're pulling off today. So even though it's not perfect, I think it's really impressive what the technology people for this conference have been able to pull off. I just need some guidance. Do I need to go backwards and redo some slides for you, or just keep going? I actually don't know. So I'm going to keep going and just hope that all of you still understand what I'm talking about. So, in terms of co occurring disorders, they can be caused by gambling activity, but also the gambling activity could be a attempt for the person to cope or escape the other co-occurring issues. So it could be depression and anxiety, it could be relational distress, it could be problems at work, it could be other things that are diagnostic, like antisocial or borderline tendencies. It could be something like to relax and soothe psychiatric symptoms. So it's not always that gambling leads to this. It could be this leads to gambling. It's very important to understand that because once you start engaging in a chemical reward imbalance, like with gambling, when you win, the shot into the reward centers of your brain of all that happiness is going to rewire how your brain responds to successful outcomes. And that's going to cause things in ordinary life to feel mundane and less rewarding because you're so used to the high volume of chemical reward from these gambling activities. That's why addictive activities are so intoxicating because they are flooding the dopamine, serotonin, and other reward systems of your brain in a way that is not naturally possible to experience. It's better than possible. It's 11 out of 10, maybe 15 out of 10, right? 10 and 10 is the max. So you're getting yourself used to something that your brain actually shouldn't be able to experience. It's like a cheat code for your reward centers. One specific thing I want to talk about quickly is gambling and bipolar disorder. So if you have bipolar disorder, that means you're having sustained periods of manic episode alternating with depressive or mood related episodes. And you are not always able to predict or handle those situations or stay in balance because the fluctuations occur in a cycle. And so your gambling habit is going to fit into that cycle inevitably if you are a client that has both of these things happening in a co occurring way. So, in order for us to treat the gambling, we also have to look at how the bipolar disorder symptoms are affecting things like their ability to self soothe, course correct, strategize, relax, be mindful, make wise decisions. And also, the way a person chooses to participate in gambling is going to change based on which part of the cycle they're in. So, gambling can look much more rapid, chaotic, and frequent in a manic state, and then depressive, they may not even gamble, or they might gamble in a much more low energy, depressed, resolve to struggle kind of way. It might be just grasping at straws and trying anything to feel better. And those are not the same activity. Even though both of them are gambling, they're not the same activity. So it's important for us as clinicians to be able to offer that nuance space for a person to fully understand themselves and see their cycle and understand their stages. Because if the gambling games they're doing and the way they're connecting with them change based on a bipolar cycle, then the things they need to do to protect themselves need to adapt to them understanding themselves in the bipolar cycle. And having proper medication management and multidisciplinary approaches that address the full person are going to be so helpful for that, because we can't just go in with a person where bipolar disorder defines how their day is going to go every day of their life, every week of their life, and just say, I'm here to help you with gambling. That is not going to be effective, because bipolar disorder is deciding every day what gambling is for them. And that is a ingrained process of how the brain is functioning. And our brain is just the way that we experience our emotions, make decisions, retain information, and see ourselves. So if that is compromised by a series of chemical interactions that are outside of our control, then we are not going to be able to make decisions all the time that are in our best interest or are within our control. So it's really important to help a person be able to overcome that and make some positive changes, baby steps up to big changes that will make differences over time. And to understand that gambling is riskier at different parts of this cycle, and it's important for you to have protections in place so that you don't engage in damaging activities that you will regret once you come out of the stage of your cycle that you're in. So, in general, with different meta analyses and different publications, what we see are all the different categories of other diagnoses that overlap in a comorbid way with gambling disorders. So we have affective disorders, depression, bipolar disorder, we have anxiety disorders, ADHD, attention deficit related disorders, personality disorders, substance use, and also trauma. Okay, these are all going to factor into, if you gamble, how likely is it that you will develop symptoms in these other areas leading up to a full diagnosis of another disorder? So, I would like to point out as a clinician, the primary diagnosis is what we send to insurances. Okay. And historically, insurances are not fond of reimbursing for a gambling disorder as the diagnosis. So, this slide is potentially among the most important that I'm going to show you today, because we have to be honest in our diagnosing. That's our ethical responsibility. But because insurances treat gambling disorder like it's a secondary or tertiary disorder, it's not always wise for us to diagnose gambling disorder as that primary disorder. So, the pathway to allow people to use their health benefits to also get help for their gambling issues is actually to fully understand the concepts of this slide. Is if they are coping or self-soothing with frequent anxiety attacks or frequent anxiety experiences, and gambling is their way of doing that. Even if we talk about gambling during the session, we're talking about gambling in the context of living life with anxiety. So you would want to do a GAD-7 in order to get a score that gives you a measurement for their anxiety level. And then, if that qualifies at a high enough score to justify generalized anxiety disorder or panic disorder or any of those kinds of things, and then gambling is part of that story, then you want to choose the primary diagnosis that allows the person to receive the treatment that they're hoping to use their benefits for. So, oftentimes it's important for us to see the full person and not just get stuck focusing on what gambling is for them. Because also, if I'm living a life where ADHD defines everything that I do, that it's an obstacle and a hurdle and I have to overcome it just to do the basic things in my life. And some of the things I do in that life process is I gamble. It doesn't help me to have a session with a counselor who only wants to talk to me about gambling, because the thing that's pushing me to gamble is I can't calm my mind down and focus unless I'm gambling. But that's an inattention and possibly a mental hyperactive issue that's involved in ADHD. So, again, in this little section of the presentation where I'm talking about psychiatric comorbidity, pay attention to the full person. And even if you know we're here to talk about gambling, consider what type of gambling is. Ask, yeah, we're here to talk about gambling and then find the answer. Find the way to complete that sentence because that's going to allow a person to get a more complete understanding of who they are and why they gamble in the first place. Another thing that is so frustrating to me as a clinician is that the DSM 5 TR looks at mental health issues from an individual psychology perspective. They might have sections that talk about genetic connections, they might have sections in their description of the diagnosis that acknowledge family connections. But overall, if you have a disorder, it's your disorder. And what we know about addiction is addiction comes from our family dynamic a lot of time, how we fit into our place with other people, and what did our family express to us about the harms and fears of addiction? How do we justify and understand our hopes for ourselves and our hopes for our family and how we fit in? We're communal beings and we have systemic attachments with people, places, and things in our environment. And when those attachments are chaotic or stressed or dysfunctional, it becomes very easy to turn to addictive activities as a way to boost our mood to a level that we're not earning from the environment around us. We add gambling to that environment, and now it becomes easier for us to have that boost of happy energy. It's fleeting, it doesn't last, but we can still feel it. So it's important for us to understand the different roles and systemic family issues that lead people to become addicted. And you see this cartoon on the screen, whether it's the victim mentality from parents or whether it's all the different things kids can do in order to keep the family in homeostasis, whether it's the family hero, the scapegoat, the lost child, the chief enabler, the mascot, or any roles that you've heard of that are not in this comic. It's important for us to understand that any person in any role that we're looking at on this slide right here can feel dissatisfied with their function in the family, can feel manipulated and used, can feel like I'm here only for other people's comfort to stay high at the sacrifice of my own. And those feelings can convince people that gambling is okay to do today because it makes me feel good. So even though the DSM does not have diagnosing for systemic connections, that there's no family dynamic disorders, right? We still need to understand the person's role in their family, their current family system, their family of origin, their life story. Okay, the narrative as well can help us to understand the why of their gambling. And then we can ask ourselves, well, how do we work on that why in other contexts that are healthier and not turn to gambling as the thing that's going to fix it? Because gambling's not going to fix it, it's going to make it worse. So now I'm going to talk about one of my very favorite concepts in this whole presentation. We are coming up on our break too, and I'm almost certain I'm going to be talking about this during our break, or if we can postpone the break till I finish this section, I think that would be really awesome. But we're going to talk about the pathway model of problem gambling, and this is from Alex Blazinski originally, and also publications from Leah Nauer and Alex Blazinski. But this model is a way for us to understand how people turn to gambling and that gambling is not the same thing for everyone. So, what I'm going to do is move on. Excuse me. I'm going to move on to a series of slides. I actually have different ones that I want to show you. This is a integrated model of problem gambling. It allows all of us, when we master the thought processes of this model, to understand the person in the context of their gambling. That's the point, is for us to see how gambling is similar across all gamblers, but unique to the individual, and how we see them and how we conceptualize the process of growth and healthy improvement for them. So the first path, we're going to call it the normal problem gambler. Okay. And this is a person who, for much of their life, did not have psychiatric problems. Okay. There are no psychological issues. Their mental health is more or less balanced without being threatened. But then one day they decided to gamble. And now gambling has gone from winning phase to losing phase to desperation and hopelessness. And now we have psychosocial problems. We're not being honest with people around us. We're preoccupied. We have tolerance. We're chasing always. We're begging for money and bailouts. We have that diagnosis now. Gambling has hit us in the wrong way. We used to be healthy, and now we need so much therapy because look what gambling did to us. That's the normal pathway for problem gambling. Path one of the pathways model. So this happens because they realize that in terms of their fun options, there's opportunity, availability, and accessibility. They also start to see it as thrilling and fun, that winning is possible. Winning stage is really big for this type of gambler. It feels good to win. I think all of us can relate to that. I hope all of us have a moment in our life where we won something and can relate to that feeling. And also, when we lose, it's just part of the process. You can't win them all. Let's keep going. And then you begin to chase and you start to notice that, oh, it's not going well for me. I lost so much this time. I think I'm depressed. I have anxiety. Maybe I should have a couple extra drinks to relax myself. And now, just like that, gambling has become the entryway to all kinds of problems. This can happen at any age, it can happen to any gender. And gambling started out as fun. The story about what gambling is was fun and entertainment, and hey, we want you to be able to do it with us, and it was social. Okay. The normal problem gambler, in essence, went from having no problem, choosing to gamble and thinking it would go just fine, and it did not go just fine. And now they have a psychological issue related to how they attach to their gambling activity. However, because of all of the health in their background, it's easier with this type of gambler to help them understand their problems, to find motivation to change things, to get back to that original sense of balance. And to, well, what's worked for you in the past? Maybe we can use that in relation to our gambling. So let's talk about path two. This one is very different. It does not go left to right, it goes right to left. All right. This person would have a vulnerability to some psychological condition in the first place. So that could be any of the diagnosing from our percentage bubble slide from earlier in the presentation. It could be anxiety, it could be affect and mood, it could be ADHD, it could be personality disorders. These things get into our life and make certain things feel like they're a struggle. It's not fun to struggle all the time. So, in order to reduce that struggle, we find fun coping mechanisms in our environment and use them to distract ourselves from the pain. And when people find gambling with that mindset, gambling can very quickly begin to take more than it gives back. And that is dangerous. Okay, that is what leads to gambling disorder for a lot of people. That's path two in this model. So you have some kind of condition that leads to the need for coping with problematic states. And then you find gambling and it works. And so you keep doing it and eventually you do it too much. Now, for this kind of person, they are looking for ways to numb the pain of past situations. This could be trauma and abuse. It could be a unstable or enmeshed home environment. It could be just to calm down anxiety and depression. It could be a way to avoid medications. If you are anti-medication, you're going to have to look for activities in order to preserve that balance in your life. And so if you find gambling and you decide this is one of the things that works, that's a dangerous proposition over time. Also, gambling might work to improve your mood for small periods of time, but in the long run, it's very likely um, to hurt your view of yourself as well, especially as you sustain more losses. So if you have low self-esteem from the beginning and you choose to cope with that using gambling, that self-esteem may in the short term feel a little boost, especially if you do have some wins. But once you start losing and start to do the desperation mambo, I guess I should call it that, right? The dance that we do when we're grasping at straws, trying to stay above water, then gambling is going to be a direct cause of hurting yourself even more than you were in your starting point. So, in essence, gambling is a distraction. It's a form of escapism and it dissociates you from your situation. You start to imagine that your true self is the self that is gambling and that the alternate self is the version that was hurting when you started looking for activities before you found gambling. It also is going to cause a distraction from being honest, right? You're going to become more dishonest with people in your life, and you may subconsciously act out against them because you are resenting them or feeling scapegoated by them. And this could be your spouse, your boss, your best friends, your adult children, or your children, um, depending on where you're at in your lifespan. And this brings us to pathway number 3, the biologically dysfunctional gambler. So, this is going to be a neurological or neurochemical dysfunction. And these are not the same as depression or anxiety or trauma in pathway 2. These are things that are more about the natural ability of the brain to navigate day to day life. So, think more like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So the brain is already naturally going to be dealing with motivation and focus and fluctuations in those things in a way that's different than what we call a neurotypical brain. And when that happens, you're engaging with family life, work, school, academics, with concentration issues, or also acting out because the rules of engagement do not seem to be fair to you. They're expecting neurotypical engagement, and you are actually seeing yourself and understanding yourself as neuroatypical. So then that can lead to scapegoating, feeling rejected, isolated, alienated, and personality based pathology. And so you're going to start thinking about yourself in a way that preserve your ego or protect your ego from those threats that come from the neurotypical surrounding environment. And once you have that mindset, you're going to become more aggressive, impulsive. You're going to have those chips on your shoulder. You're going to try your very best to argue with your existence. And then part of the rebellion against your existence is going to be doing things that paint the picture that you're actually closer to neurotypical than you thought. And actually, gambling does this for people. If you have ADHD and you're being told you would reach your potential and be amazing if you just applied yourself. And you hear that 20 times a day. And so then you get that chip on your shoulder and you try too hard and you're overstressed and you just need to calm down the overstressed. So let's gamble. And oh my gosh, you say I can't focus, but I focused on that slot machine for 3 hours straight. I played poker for the entire night. Look at what I do. I even made money that one time. You said that I wouldn't meet my potential unless I focused. Well, look, I focused on things that are actually fun and I made all this money. That's the dream life of a gambler that's in pathway 3, is that the gambling creates a solution as a counterpoint against what society is telling them about their neurological dysfunctional brain, their neuroatypicalness. This is not the biggest group. And I think the reason for that is actually we need to understand this group more. But it is a large enough group for us to study it and understand it and keep moving forward with understanding it. This group is going to be constantly bored because, again, they're not meeting their potential. They lose their focus. You need to apply yourself. And so their counterpoint is, here I am, entertain me. Like Nirvana sang in the 90s, right? And they're bored because they're not being challenged, but they're not being challenged because their brain is firing so fast that the challenges in day to day life were not necessarily designed to keep them engaged. And that's why gambling comes in as sort of a savior activity because it is as fast as you want it to go. It is impossible to master, but it causes you to have those little incentives to chase it. So you keep going after it, but will never catch it. And as a result, since you can't catch it, you will escalate the activity as you develop a tolerance for it. You'll bet higher dollars, you'll play longer amounts of time. And the reason you're doing that is because you need very badly to achieve a level of gambling activity success that forms your counter argument that you're doing okay, right? You're treating gambling like it's your medication for the way your brain functions. In the long run, gambling is a much more expensive medication than your medication. So it's not a good deal for you. Okay. Good deal, bad deal. Really interesting way for our language to mirror the activity of gambling, by the way, if you haven't noticed that. Um, Whenever we say something has a track record, like these presentations seem to have a track record of generating insightful questions from the audience. We're just talking about a CEU training on gambling disorder when I say something like that. But the language that I just used is inspired by horse racing. So gambling is established part of our society, and we're all, no matter what pathway we're in, we're just trying to cope with it and manage it. But I want to show you this slide because it shows all 3 pathways at once. It's one of my favorite slides I've ever made myself, and it shows the normal path. You were not a gambler, but you gambled, and now you have a gambling problem. The emotionally disturbing path, which is I have issues I'm dealing with and I'm always feeling upset and mad and defeated, but when I gamble, I feel like it's going to be okay. And then the third part, my brain does not function like a neurotypical brain is, which causes all kinds of difficulties with attachment to my surrounding environment. And I need to show you that I'm okay. I need activities that engage me. And I found gambling, and it actually does engage me. And I'm going to use that to the best of my ability to cope with an environment that doesn't understand me in the first place. Those are the 3 paths of how people develop gambling issues. And I think if we can learn to talk to a person who comes to us and says, hey, I'd like to do treatment, I think I have a problem with gambling. But we don't stop there because not every gambler is the same. And we're able to look at a pathways model like this and apply it to our client and understand we don't have to teach them this model. This model is for us to understand them and generate the insights that are going to make them go, oh, wow, I've never thought about why I gamble that way before. That's what we use this for. It's for us to pass on in ways that will help the client. Always that is the goal. So I hope that a slide like this and a model like the Pathways model is going to be a helpful tool for all of you to be able to do that. So let's summarize this session and get you into your break. I've really enjoyed talking with all of you about this. I've not received any questions yet, so I'm sure I'll get those during the break and we can start there when we resume. But gambling occurs on a continuum from being healthy to problematic. Not everyone who gambles needs to drop what they're doing, go to 3 GA meetings a week and have a weekly therapy session. Okay, that's not true. That's not what gambling does to people. But people who do pursue counseling have a range of difficulties. Not all gambling problems are just gambling problems. Gambling problems are problems related to mental health and functioning in our day to day existence. And if we're able to see the person holistically and understand what their day to day existence is, why they're motivated to gamble, what their fantasy world is, and what kinds of lies are preserving the ability to gamble, then we're able to work with the client and build treatment goals, objectives, and protocols for them that are individualized and tailored to the specific way that gambling is fitting into their life, or not fitting, I should say. The Pathways model is also an in-depth, intuitive model for helping us to quickly understand the nuanced ways that different gamblers will gamble differently. And it's important so that we can find specific ways for them to create repair and growth opportunities in their life so that it's not just the winning phase, losing phase, desperation, and hopelessness that they experience, but it's the critical phase and the growth and the opportunity that comes up on the other side. So we will do questions after the break once I receive those, and then we'll move on to the next topic. Thank you so much for being a great audience for this first almost 2 hours of presenting. And I'm looking forward to doing our next 2 topics on our way to the end of the conference. Thanks so much. See you in a little bit. Okay, everyone, I hope you enjoyed your break. I'm back to do topics 2 and 3 for today, and then we'll get you to the end of the conference and lunch, at least how I understand the sequence of events for today.
This is the World Health Organization quality of life indicators. That's one way to look at if we're effective. We do got to prove it. We can't just hang out. So you could use that. What do you think of harm reduction, where people say, I want to gamble less? Anyone for it or against it?
It's been very effective.
Has it?
Yeah.
In what way?
In terms of, particularly if you're doing cognitive behavioral therapy, in terms of altering your schema.
Yeah. So when Dr. Whalen said yesterday that people don't just quit cigarettes, they go from 20 to 10 and 10 to 5. That is the most effective way to make change, is by 2% increments. And when people come to us and want services, that's one of the first questions we ask, and we like to use the phrase, I wonder. That's a great motivational interviewing tool. I wonder if you're interested in stopping completely right now, or I wonder if you're interested in doing a tapering off gradual, or I wonder if you're interested in having a relationship with gambling over the long run, that you can have gambling in your life, and that can change, but what are you thinking for right now, kind of thing. And by giving people permission to not have to quit immediately, and it's a grief, they're going to lose their best friend that was there for them, that does really support getting some traction on it, building motivation, finding things to fill in those places for time and engagement and meaning and love and stuff in their lives. And then maybe they do want to quit. Think of it as a lily pad. If you put your whole weight on a lily pad, you're going to start sinking. So in harm reduction, if you're like, yep, I'm going to just have a budget, and every payday I'm going to do this much, we haven't seen that work very much in some instances. But if you do it for a while and you're like, you know what, I'm not sure, like with my video game, I didn't really need it this week. If I'm really into my work, I don't need that. I was escaping from doing spreadsheets back home, is what that was.
Yeah. Also, in Oregon, if you've experienced any gambling harm, you qualify for services for free. We do not diagnose, right? That is not our role. So not everybody that we talk to is coming to us because they have a gambling addiction, or even that they've gone into like super problematic behaviors. It means that they've met one indicator one time. Like that's what we know. So not everybody's going to be in a place where abstinence is even like required for them, right? They may just be looking for some tools to make sure that they don't experience that harm again. Does that count as harm reduction? I'm seeing some nods. Yeah, I would agree. So.
Or can you, if you were addicted to video lottery machines, which at least 80% of our clients are the slot machines. I can't wait till it's on your digital handheld and 24 hours a day connected to your body, accessibility with no currency being part of it because you just push a button so it's not real money to you. It's going to be an epidemic. It's going to be absolutely awful. And no regulation. We're really concerned about that. Sorry, that was a tangent. What were we talking about?
Harm reduction.
Huh?
Harm reduction.
Harm reduction.
Moving
Instead
from
of
one.
going to a venue where you have to be basically free of a lot of intoxicants in your system because there's people that are certified by the Liquor Control Commission. You can't be drunk while you're there falling down. Like, you have to keep it together. You have to be wearing clothes and shoes. There's a closing time. Like, there's structure to it that makes it a little bit more friction than on my phone in the middle of the night when no one knows and I'm lonely and stuff. So if people need to do scratchy tickets instead of lottery machines, that's harm reduction. Does that scratch the itch, so to speak? Seen it work. Ever seen that commercial about why you can't just have one potato chip? They're so good. Yeah, they got the trifecta of deliciousness: sugar, fat, salt. We're designed for that. Our nucleus accumbens is like, thank you, sir, may I have another? And so a little reminder of brain neurology is, on your laptop, if you're like me, I cleaned it up for y'all last night. Did you see my laptop? I didn't have like 500 folders just sitting there, pictures of dogs and stuff. I was just like, this meeting and these videos. When you do that to your laptop, it slows it down because it has everything that's supposed to be quick and fast accessible up in the front. And it's like, I can't use my power when there's all this. You need to put it back there in the ROM, in the hard drive for it to operate. And so I think of the prefrontal cortex is where we have our logic, this is going to have long-term consequences, we can make good decisions. All that's happening up there in the front of the brain. That's why we try to slow things down, that we don't make really immediate decisions that can affect people's choices for their long-term recovery. But when we eat a potato chip, it goes to that reward hub of the ventral striatum, and it goes, this is something that will keep you alive. You need food. You'll know this is food because it tastes sweet and salty and fatty, and yay, I'm happy. And you do that in the front, just like the RAM of the front of your brain. Well, when you keep doing that, it gets kicked back to the ROM that you've done it enough times. So every 2.5 seconds, dosing dopamine that you're sending to your nucleus accumbens, thank you, thank you, of that reward, that's how the addiction is increasing. And I mention this as a way of doing the harm reduction. If we're going to continually introduce the thing that's activating the dorsal striatum, it's going to want to keep having you introduce it. So you crave the foods you eat. If you stop eating sugar for a while, you get like, I don't really want it that bad anymore. If you stop gambling, you kind of find other stuff to do. We were talking about smoking. I mean, after a while, you kind of go like, oh, it's kind of stinky. I'm not sure I want that anymore. But continually having this, engaging with it, and then detoxing and being in withdrawal and then back and then forth, really isn't ideal. So when we say it can work, it needs to work with structure. Okay, you want to keep the gambling in your life? What's that going to look like? How will we know it's working? How much are you prepared to lose? What are your financial barriers? So once you've activated your dorsal striatum, you're not mortgaging your house online, taking out 1,000% interest loan, stuff like that. I'm going to skip that. Do you know Gabor Mate? Yeah? You're smiling. Do you believe? You a follower? Do you like his work? Okay, so I think it's, was he Yugoslavian? Hungarian? He was a child in World War II, and his parents were, I don't know if they were in internment camps or something. He was raised by an aunt, and his aunt called the doctor and said, I got this baby here, it's crying and crying. And the doctor said, yep, all my Jewish babies are crying right now. And it's because they were stressed, because the parents weren't there. That's what happened with my dogs yesterday. It was a different routine, and lady wasn't there, and so let's get in a big old fight. And that made him start studying attachment and how it affects us when we don't have our needs met as children. And that, he calls it attunement, can come from just about anything. I think in my case, my brother was only a year older and not very healthy, and that took my mom's energy to worry about him. So I was kind of just there. And here we are. I think if someone cuts me off in traffic, I'm unlovable, right? I come by it honestly. By being autistic, I received dozens of thousands of negative messages in my life that other people wouldn't experience. I didn't feel that I was liked or wanted. I didn't have attunement as a kid. So that's one thing that's really useful. I highly recommend, to give just random advice, you download the app called Libby, Libby, and plug in your library card, and whenever you hear of a book that's of interest, order the audio book on Libby, and it might not be available, but then it shows up 4 weeks later, and you can listen while you're driving or going for a walk. If you don't like it, it doesn't matter. It didn't cost anything, but it gives you these regular doses of stuff that's interesting. And this book is really the beginning of treating people with a lot of dignity. He was doing MAT back in Canada in the 80s, and his clients were awful. They would draw swastikas on his office and steal his pager, and like, he really got put through it, and he loved them anyway. He also said that he believed treating heroin addiction back then was palliative. And to me, what palliative means is it's not going to be cured, but we can provide comfort. And I don't tell our clients that the odds are pretty bad. Those of you that work with like opioids and meth, it's single-digit success rate. They can have engagement, they can have attunement, they can have quality of life, they can gamble less, and some of us can gamble never again, but let's look at all that other stuff too. Palliative's a little harsh, that's his word, but I appreciate that as anchoring one side of our success. When we talk about, do you want to quit altogether or cut back, what do you expect when it comes back? I don't say if. I prepare people that it's coming for you. It's the land shark knocking on the door. How much money are you going to let it have access to? I still have some financial barriers. I don't want it to take my life savings. How will it get to it? What are its ways? And what happens after the gambling happens? Am I going to be so upset that I want to end my life? That happens. Is everything okay, you guys?
Keep going.
Okay.
Yeah. Keep rolling.
Who do I tell that I gambled? Do I tell Brian? Does Brian tell me? Do I tell my counselor? Do I tell my family? Who is safe to let in? Because a lot of times our families do this, this can never happen again. And that's a pretty big ultimatum for something that has an incredibly high recurrence. So that comes with some psychoeducation for families that we're doing palliative here. We're making a plan to have as least harm and consequences from the gambling and frequency. When gambling happens again, let's learn from it. Tell them the thing about high school and math.
So when you're in high school and you take a math test, let's just say that you don't pass that math test, you get 49%. What happens? Do they kick you back to kindergarten and say, you've learned nothing, it's time to start over? Okay, I'm seeing some head shaking. Okay, good. Okay, we're all on the same page, right? It is not a sign of total and utter failure just because you didn't succeed. I'm in martial arts, black belt testing, right? We have to do board breaks. If I, testing for my 4th degree black belt, don't break the boards, they don't say, Brian, you've learned nothing. We're going to put you back to a white belt. You start over, day 1. They say, the technique appears to not be working for you. Let's back up. Let's take a look at what's happening. Let's try it a few more times and then give it another push, right? So recognizing that this idea of like a restart, a reset, we hear it all the time. I have to reset my date. And it's like, really? You've learned nothing in this whole time just because gambling occurred again? Just because it happened? That means that you've taken nothing from this? And so part of that stigma relief is being able to acknowledge that sometimes it will happen, and that doesn't mean that we have failed utterly. It means that our tools may not have been prepared for the task.
We got like a holster and it has all our tools on it. And you know how specialized like surgical tools can be? So what if I don't have this one right here that's like I'm traveling and my dog got hurt and I have 3 more presentations to write and I'm waiting at the Las Vegas